Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jean, the Digital Event Coordinator at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. We are part of the Info Exchange Group, a not-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest social challenges by creating use of technology. For those who haven't attended a webinar with us before, Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand facilitate a wide range of online learnings, including webinars, workshops, boot camps, and webcons to help social sector upskills in all digital areas. If you're interested to learn more about us and more upcoming webinars, please go to our website and you have more information. Today, I'm very excited to welcome you to join Think a Cyber Attack Won't Happening to You, Think Again, by Julia and Ambika from PwC. So Julia Whiten is the manager of PwC Cybersecurity and Digital Trust. She's focusing on post-incident reviews, cybersecurity strategies, governance and risk, identity and access management. She's passionate about helping organizations identify and capitalize on opportunities to improve cyber capability and build resilience against cyber threats. And we also have Ambika Agarwal, the Director of PwC Cybersecurity and Digital Trust. Ambika is a thought leader and risk professional with more than 11 years of deep expertise in cybersecurity and risk management. In her current role at PwC, she works with organizations to adopt an enterprise-wide approach to manage cyber threats and secure their digital transformation journeys. Before we begin, we'll start with a bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted. If you have any technical issues, please type into the questions box and I'll be here to assist you. If you have any questions during the webinar, please also type into the questions box and they will get them answered by the end of the webinar. So we really encourage you to ask as many questions as possible to make it very interactive. But please also note that the comments and questions will not be appear to the entire group. Please also note that the webinar is being recorded. The link with the recording and the presentation deck will be sent to you in 1 to 2 business days. And there's also a very short survey by the end of the webinar. Please help us to complete that for an even better experience in the future. I guess most of you is now seeing the cover page. As you can see there is, please go to www.menti.com. So please have your mobile with you. I will suggest that if you can log into the page now by using your mobile phone, just type on the browser www.menti.com and enter the code. That's an 8-digit you can see on the screen now. That's 8268-6554. So if you can enter and then go to that site, there's a very interesting activities later on with Juliana and Abika. So while you're seeing the page now, please do that so that we can do it more efficiently later on in the speech. All right, so now enough for me. I'll now pass to Julia and Ambika for today's section. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Hi, everyone. So great to have you here. Today, we'll talk about a few things and help you understand a bit more about the cyber threat landscape and the business landscape for not-for-profit. So we will start with the current business technology and threat landscape, what's happening and where are cyber threats going. We will then talk about some of the scenario-based case studies that we have picked up from the industry, and we'll also share some of the learnings and simple tips to protect yourself against cyber threats based on those case studies. After that, we will talk about key takeaways and some of the resources that are available at your disposal for use and distribution within your network as well as your organization. So the agenda is quite packed. We've got some interactive activities throughout the presentation, and we look forward to any questions. I'll pass on to Julia for our first activity.
Thanks, Ambika. Hi everyone, thanks for having us here today. So I'm going to talk you through a bit of a scenario. It's just a collection of kind of different cyber scenarios that we've put together. And while I'm talking through this scenario, we'd love for you to kind of listen out for some of the red flags that might be indications that a cyber threat might be present or that a cyber incident might be about to occur. You can put your guesses into the chat during the scenario walkthrough. That would be fantastic. And once we've finished, we'll give you a few minutes and then talk through what those red flags were. So here's the scenario. Imagine it's a Friday afternoon and you're about to go and start your weekend, whether it's picking up your kids or going to meet friends after work. But just before you leave, you get an email from your boss requesting an urgent payment to be made to one of your priority clients. So you download and open the email attachment that comes through, which is titled Payment Transfer Information. Once you open this attachment, a message pops up notifying you that your computer requires a software update, and it has a number there provided and asks you to call the IT support desk for help in getting that software update processed. Calling the number, you ask them to help you run the update. And the IT support team then asks for your full name, email address, and password. You start the update and leave your computer unlocked and running for the weekend so that the update can be processed. After the weekend, you get back to work on Monday and log into your account, but you discover that you can't access any of your systems or data. So that's the scenario. We're hoping there are a couple of red flags or clear indicators there, and maybe some more subtle ones that we can talk through. I'm sorry, Jean, if the chat only goes through to you. And if we can ask you to have a few guesses, I'll wait a couple more seconds, and then I'll start walking through what some of those red flags were in that scenario. Okay, we'll kick off. First of all, the email from your boss requesting an urgent payment. Anytime there's a sense of urgency and something that's requested kind of at the end of a working day or just before a weekend or holiday period, it can be a sign that there's something fishy going on, and anything that usually asks you to bypass the usual checks and balances or do something more urgently than usual should raise a couple of questions. That was the first one to be aware of. The second one was the email attachment. So before opening any email attachments, even from trusted senders like someone you communicate with every day, really important to make sure you're checking the email address very carefully compared to their usual email address. If it's sent from a mobile phone, kind of checking the mobile phone numbers before opening any of those email attachments. And hopefully your system will have some protections in place as well to make sure that your attachments are being checked and scanned before they're being downloaded and opened. The next one was around the IT support team. So an IT support team should never ask for your account password. That should be an immediate red flag. That's something that ideally your IT support team would encourage you not to share with anyone. It should be very top secret, like a PIN for a banking account or anything like that. Full name and email address, not so risky, but the password bit should raise a red flag. The leaving your computer unlocked for the weekend, ideally you should lock your computer every time that you walk away from it. Takes a bit to get into the habit, but really important, and definitely not leaving it unlocked over the weekend when there could be other people around the office, whether it's cleaners or other staff that could then access your systems and data. The final bit was around when you return to work on Monday and can't access any of your systems or data, that might be an indication that there has been some kind of cyber incident, whether it's a ransomware attack or something else, which we'll go into a bit more detail of later. Yeah, that usually locks up whether it's access to your computer itself or access to any of the important things you need to do your job. So hopefully you picked out some of those. Sorry, Jean.
Yeah, so we got a couple of responses from our audience. That's really great. We got Brian saying that, he's really smart, saying that, actually all the whole thing is a red flag. And Jeffrey is saying that all staff are aware of the IT support number, so anything different is a red flag. So we got a couple of responses from the audience.
Very good. Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you, Jean. Yeah, great to see that you're clued in about what to look out for, and hopefully this webinar will help identify some of those maybe more subtle or yeah, tips and tricks that we can share with you around protecting against these threats. I'll pass on to you, Vika.
Thanks. I think this activity shows that people have some inherent knowledge of cyber already. So I want to kick off by talking about what is happening in the not-for-profit sector, what's driving the need to focus on cybersecurity and the why. So not-for-profit sector is a unique environment where there are increasing pressures to do more with less. They are under the pressure to maintain engagement with supporters, to drive ongoing investment with the expectations of the regulators as well as the government, but also there is an expectation to harness the power of digital tools and techniques and social media. So government is looking to reduce ways to reduce their spending. And this creates a lot of pressure on not-for-profits to be more efficient, to be more competitive, and more sophisticated in their use of digital tools. Now, because of this pressure, obviously, NFP's reliance on technology is increasing. And without the right technology to drive supporter engagement, enabling staff to deliver services efficiently, measure client and community outcomes, and communicating success in a professional manner, not-for-profit will not be able to keep up the sector as a whole. In addition, we have also seen with COVID and the transition from workplace to work from home, so there's more hybrid working. That has created or accelerated, I would say, the transition from physical to digital world. And technology can be incredibly transformative, and it has the ability to increase efficiency. The movement to cloud is what we are seeing is helping a lot of organizations to scale up and be more sustainable in providing services. It saves precious time and money. But at the same time, we need to recognize that digitization increases and it also creates greater number of potential entry points for cyber criminals who are seeking to steal sensitive data or exploit vulnerabilities or launch ransomware attacks. So there has to be a balance, and I think cybercrime is going to continue as well as the digitization for organizations, but cybersecurity can actually be an enabler for that digitization conversation. We have also seen in our latest surveys that a lot of the NFPs have started moving to or are moving to cloud platforms. So last year it was 58%, and now this year is 69%. So you can see how their transition from cloud is happening faster than before, but it's not always easy to find the right skills to do that work. So there's also a question about how do we get the right skills? How do we upskill people around digitization and cybersecurity for not-for-profit? So in order to future-proof this sector, I think one of the things that not-for-profit surveys have told us is that the sector is now prioritizing developing staff capability, improving their digital marketing, their websites, and there's a big focus on information security. So we'll show you now how cybercrime is evolving and what does that mean for not-for-profit sector. Now, data and information security is one of the top 3 priorities for not-for-profit sector based on the surveys and research that has happened. But as you can see here, 400% increase was observed in cyber attacks since COVID-19. 400%. That's a big number. And healthcare continues to be one of the most targeted sector when it comes to cyber attacks because of the attractive nature of the data, the impact, the safety, and the social impact of health sector as a whole. But not every sector is immune to this. So every sector is impacted, and not-for-profits work in every sector that we operate in today. So the impacts of cyber threats are not just about data theft anymore. These impacts are ranging from disrupting operations to actually impacting society and staff and employees as well, so their day-to-day lives as well. So for example, in case of the Woodland Trust, which is a UK-based charity, they were compromised by a sophisticated attack and they had to dismantle their core databases, which contained information about their charity schemes and funding schemes. So their database, which was more Woods scheme database, that was impacted. Because of this, their donation, online shopping, application for grants, that whole process was disrupted, and they faced a lot of operational consequences because of it. So you can see how it's, well, data is quite important and data breaches have happened, but there are operational consequences of a data breach, of a cyber attack as well. So today, cybersecurity means much more than running antivirus, means much more than having firewalls around the environment. It's a enterprise-wide risk that not-for-profits face and can actually impact their donor trust and subscriptions as well. So we'll talk about that in a lot more detail now. So let's look at some of those impacts and what a cyber attack looks like in detail. There are different motivations for cyber attacks to happen, and they're different based on the motivations. The groups are different as well. So we see a lot of criminal activity, which is for money, and groups are motivated by gaining financial advantage. So if you think about ransomware, if you think about organized criminal groups who are after financial gain, they are basically using such techniques such as ransomware or data breach even to hold people for ransom, and get access to funds. So this is a very common scenario. I'm sure everyone has heard of ransomware with exfiltration by now and is familiar with that. Um, when it comes to a different motivation like espionage, which is around advanced persistent threats or more sophisticated threats, they are nation-based threats that are aimed at compromising organizations for sensitive information or strategically advantageous information. So any political or economic advantage that a country can get will go after that type of information. And these type of attacks are very persistent. They're not done in a day or two. They're not out of curiosity or opportunistic. They're very well planned, very well resourced. And we've seen organizations, like we monitor threat activity, and we've seen where countries like China, Korea, Russia, and I don't want to name a lot of countries, but every country has this capability to have some offensive capability to attack the other countries. And we monitor their activities. So if there's a Christmas holiday period, the activity goes down and then it goes up because basically it's the human on the other side as well, because everyone takes leaves. And then hacktivist is another type of motivation. They are after making a social statement. They want to disrupt the business services or damage your reputation so that they can raise awareness about a social cause. Anonymous, I'm sure people have heard of. It's a very famous hacktivist group, and will try to deface your website to put their cause on that. And then sabotage, it's more around, they're not deliberate, but they're almost seeking to damage, destroy, or damage the integrity of data and systems. So there's different motivations for different types of attacks, and based on the attacks, the impacts are quite different or similar as well. So there are direct costs, which we all can see through investigation, remediation, regulation, and cost of the breach. And there are a few examples that we will discuss in our case studies. There are indirect costs as well, which we don't really anticipate at the start, which is if you have cyber insurance, there will be cyber premiums, which will increase after cyber attacks. There are frauds and class actions lawsuits as well. So a lot of organizations have faced lawsuits and penalties because they were unable to prove how they protected their customers or donor information. Alongside those costs, there is intangible costs. And I think that's more important, which you can't really quantify, but loss of trust is really where the not-for-profit sector strives in. A lot of the business is working on the basis of trust. And I think if a cyber attack can impact the trust of the subscribers, the donors, the funders, and damage the brand reputation as well. So we have examples where we've seen that it has impacted subscribers or donations, and even the value of any mergers or acquisitions have decreased. So without going into too much detail here itself, we will talk about some of the examples in the case studies. And Now we'll talk about what does a typical cyber attack look like.
Yeah, I'm going to talk through this not quickly, but I'll just give you an overview of what the different stages of a typical cyber attack will look like. And of course, as Ambika mentioned, depending on the motivations and the types of attack, this will vary. But generally what it looks like is it starts out with a bit of reconnaissance, which is about the attacker gathering intelligence on the target organization, on its customers and even its employees to kind of refine their attack and increase their chances of success. So that can look like social media analysis, checking profiles, getting personal details on target victims, conducting network scanning, or doing digital footprinting. Once they've done that recon, which can last days or months depending on how sophisticated the attack is and what type of attack it is, they'll move on to infiltration. That's usually where an attacker will trick a user or someone involved in the organization into executing malicious software to compromise their machine. They often try to do this so that there's no evidence and they can go undetected until the attack is actually carried out or executed. So the infiltration period usually lasts hours to days, and it can, the tactics that they use can range from targeted phishing emails, which we'll talk a bit more about, social engineering and software vulnerabilities, depending on the type of attack. Following infiltration, they move on to embedding and orientation. So they're in the organization's network. They might look to gain further access and increase their reach across the network, and also install different tools. And those tools can help them hang on to the access that they have, look across the various systems and data, and also get more information about what kind of processes, what are the really critical business functions and operations for the target, so that they know exactly where's their weakest point or where they should be hitting. They want to find the best position to do the most damage, so this orientation is part of that exercise. And they're also looking for high privilege level users and other login details that they can use to expand their attack. Then they move on to execution and covering their tracks. So execution usually lasts hours to days, and what it looks like is the attacker executing the attack and then doing a bit of a cleanup to remove any evidence. And the reason they want to do that is because they want to stop the target identifying their presence in the network for as long as possible. If the victim does notice that something's going on or someone's in the network, they'll often take steps to try to respond and remediate and get that person out of their space, basically. And what the attacker wants to do is maintain their access for as long as possible. So during that kind of orientation and infiltration period, they'll look to get as many different credentials and points of access as possible, so that even if they do get kicked out, they can come back in at a later date. That's why things like resetting passwords after the event is so important, because that's one of the key motivations for cyber attackers. After the attack's actually executed, the response and recovery period can take weeks to months. And I think it's really important to understand that depending on how prepared an organization is for a cyber attack and how mature their capability is, the average length of system outage or downtime as a result of a cyber attack is roughly 25 days. But that's just for primary impacts relating to the attack. So that's like systems not able to be used, operations not happening. There are much longer secondary impacts that can last months, and usually do last months, where people are trying to rebuild, get their manual workarounds, transition back to their business as usual, those kind of things. I think as well it's worth mentioning that recovery activities often or typically make up for about half of the total cost of cyber incidents. So Ambika just touched on it, but the cost to respond and recover, whether it's launching investigations into the incident, doing major overhauls of the way your organization is set up from an IT perspective, performing updates and rebuilding can be a very costly exercise, and usually is.
Yeah. I think I just add there that this is like an old school robbery where you scan. So recon is like you're scanning the house, you're looking for some weak spots, a small dog, an open window. Infiltration is something like you're entering the house, and embed and orientate is around finding that, big TV, crown jewels, and those assets. And execution and covering of tracks is stealing the jewelry and getting out of the house, being unnoticed by the CCTV camera. So really putting it in a simple way that this is no different than how people operate, and there are people on the other side. So it's important to realize that, but at the same time, the cost to recovery is quite high. So we need to be prepared for that response state very, very quickly.
And I think one other thing, Ambika, is also the stages that I've walked through here present the opportunities that organizations have to use tools and intel and things to identify when these things might be happening. So you can see across these different stages of a cyber attack, there are multiple opportunities to recognize whether a phishing email has been clicked on, whether someone's moving across your network, whether there's data leaking out, and we'll talk through some of the resources and tools that are available to help you identify those things as well. Great. We'll move on to one more activity. So hopefully you've all got the Menti code and website going. If not, I'll give you a couple of seconds to just get that up on your mobile phone. It should be quite straightforward, as Jean mentioned, just going to www.menti.com and entering that code 82686554. Once you've done that, I will flick over and see what we've come up with. So the question was, when you think of strong cybersecurity defense, what words come to mind? And great to see we've got a lot of responses here. We've got dependable, we've got governance, we've got proactive, we've got strong passwords, staff awareness, trust and
I like multidimensional. That's yeah, it's multidimensional, multifunctional.
MFA, obviously something that people are very well aware of. That's been added a couple of times. Surface area, staff education.
Yeah, getting some great suggestions. Leadership focus is really important. I think tone from the top sets the role model examples for staff to follow. So that's a really good one.
Excellent. It looks like a couple of these are definitely things that we'll talk to when we go through our case studies, Ambika. So we might wrap it up, but great to see that everyone's kind of got a lot of those key defense items front of mind.
Awesome.
Great. We might move on to our first case study then. The first one we wanted to touch on, the first type of cyber attack or scam, is business email compromise. And no doubt a lot of people have heard of this one. We wanted to talk you through one of the scenarios where an Australian hedge fund actually ended up going bankrupt after a cyber attack, which was a BEC scam. I'll start off with a bit of a definition. So business email compromise is a scam that targets employees or executives at organizations, and usually they target the people who are authorized to make payments, so account teams or people with that high level of access. And they usually look to trick the victim into transferring money into an account that they operate, or a fraudulent account. So a bit of context, last year in Australia, the average reported loss from business email compromise scams was roughly $50,000. They're not advanced attacks. They don't require kind of really specialized techniques or tooling. They mostly rely on social engineering and kind of employee behavior and user behavior to manipulate their victims. The BEC attacks are mostly opportunistic, and finding the attacker, or attributing the attack to someone, is usually quite difficult. And the scams are quite simple, but they often have very high potential rewards, and we'll talk through this example here. Basically, this hedge fund was targeted by some fake Zoom invitation emails, which saw its trustee and administrator mistakenly approve $8.7 million in fraudulent invoices. So a few employees were sent these fake Zoom invitations, and when they opened those invitations, malicious software was installed on their network, which allowed the attackers to take control of their email system. Once the attackers had access and control to that email system, they then did a bit of investigating to see who usually asked the questions and gave the permissions, and they used that access to exploit trusted relationships between the trustee and administrator. And basically what happened was one of the co-founders of the hedge fund was at the gym and received a request to transfer some money, and they usually had a two-step process, which was a kind of check to make sure that they could verify the payment instructions. This organisation recognised that there were lots of red flags that they could have and would have usually noticed, but they noted that due to staff working at home, their informal checks had been weakened and some of those verification processes may have fallen down. They were able to stop most of the payments, but the attackers got away with $1.2 million. And it was just out of luck that the co-founder checked the business account the next day to discover that that money had been transferred to a company with a name they weren't familiar with, who had a bank account in southwestern Sydney. And later that month, once it was discovered, the sole shareholder of the company that was unfamiliar to the hedge fund actually left the country on a plane with that money. So yeah, that was a big loss for them. Obviously they had their funds stolen, but they also suffered significant reputational damage. They lost their main client, they withdrew their business, and they were forced to go into receivership. So obviously a very dramatic impact, but that's when we talk about business email compromise being a relatively simple attack type, and having large impacts and large costs to businesses that are affected by them. That's what we mean. I won't talk through the timeline, but that's just an example of how a business email compromise attack can occur and the different points on the timeline. The D+0, obviously the days since the initial access was established, but we will send out these slides like Jane said, and you can have a look into the detail of the timeline afterwards. I'll pass to Mbika to talk through some of the lessons learned and simple steps to improve security based on that case study.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are lessons learned from this that you probably already recognize, but many of the cyber incidents occur through human error, and business email compromise exploits that cognitive biases that people have. So a very key one is authority bias. If something is coming from a legitimate higher authority, from people you probably don't talk to every day but report to, and you think that this task is urgent or I have to do it because my boss is asking, they exploit this bias as humans, and then those attacks are sort of realized. So we need to train our employees to identify and respond to those type of activities, to tell them how do you spot a social engineering attack or a phishing email or a business email compromise email, and that will help us to get notifications, or the security teams and IT teams notifications in time. So we want to promote the behavior of reporting and also train our employees to identify those activities. Another lesson learned is that the failure of doing business checks and processes can actually lead to dramatic consequences. So in this scenario, there were a lot of red flags and payment was still processed. I think if it doesn't take a lot of time to just pick up the phone and validate whether the payment needs to be made, whether it's the right account number, whether it's the right person that we are transferring it to, or where the payment has been requested from. So making sure that the processes are really clear to people is an important aspect of avoiding these type of scams and compromises. That was the people side, but there are defenses from a technology perspective as well. So preventing these things through the mechanism of detection and making sure that we have response and recovery plans in place. So in case of Woodland Charity, for example, they had to engage forensics experts very quickly. They had to engage regulators very quickly to make sure that they're responding to the sophisticated attack. And not having those processes in place at the time of the attack can be a big overhead and operational cost. So making sure that those processes are in place and we have the detection capabilities to identify the activities during the infiltration and exploit phase is quite important. So I've pretty much covered some of the lessons learned and simple steps to improve, but just reiterating that making your employees aware of those warning signs, making sure that everyone knows about the verification processes and the process of invoicing, and checking communication details for specific sender email address and double checking the previous sort of correspondence with the current correspondence can be quite handy to avoid a lot of these compromises.
I think Ambika, based on the scenario we just talked about, the addressee of that invoice was actually different to what it usually was. So usually it was a trustee and that was part of the requirement. This one was addressed directly to the executive and that just wasn't picked up at the time it was looked at.
Yeah, so those small things can make a big difference. There have been scams where there were spelling mistakes and they were not spotted, and some English teacher was part of the team and they spotted that mistake, and then that incident was actually detected and a big amount was transferred. This was for a financial services organization as well. So, yeah.
That's a really good point as well. Actually, we talked about, failure of human behavior, but the fact that your employees can actually be your first line of defense as well. People do detect things a lot just by paying attention to detail and having those behaviors ingrained as well. Great, we'll move on to the second case study, and please do add your questions throughout this case study walkthrough, and we'll get to them at the end. Make sure we hopefully have time. The second scenario we wanted to talk through was a data breach scenario resulting in the loss of customer data. So data breaches can occur through a range of different cyber attacks or scam scenarios. Some of the key ones we see are phishing, so emails where confidential information is stolen by sending fraudulent messages or emails to victims, or spear phishing, which is a much more targeted type of phishing where criminals use social engineering to target high net worth, target companies, individuals using really realistic bait and messages, so using the same style of language, the same kind of slang that people might use to talk to their colleagues based on information that's available. So that might be from things like publicly available company reports, or then if we move on to like the social media side of things, they will review the language that people use in their updates and posts and the people that they're tagging to see who knows who, what's the way that they usually talk, who do we want to target. So this particular scenario involved attackers stealing the information of a not-for-profit organization's complete donated database. So over 1 million charity supporters, approximately 1.7 of their donors had their names, addresses, dates of birth, emails, phone numbers, genders, and in some case donation history and some banking details actually stolen and published on the dark web for sale. The organisation then had to go and notify all their affected parties and do a lot of communications around warning victims that they were at a heightened risk of follow-up attacks and follow-up scams where attackers might be using that information from the dark web and posing as a representative from the organisation, even with further warning communication. So they had to be really, really, really vigilant around what they were opening. And it's quite hard if you're the affected organisation telling people not to open communications that seem like they're coming from your organisation. It can be very tricky to navigate. So we don't know too much about the type of attack that led to this data breach, but we do know that, as you can see, it had a massive impact on the business. They had to suspend their fundraising activities and get an IT forensic investigation undertaken. As I mentioned, there were lots of notifiable data breach requirements given the impact on personal information. And obviously their supporters being at risk of increased cyber threats, as well as the negative media coverage and reputational damage. So I'm sure you probably can all remember, or if you've seen this on the news, we've chosen not to name them, but it was a very high profile attack and there were lots of reputational and brand considerations based on the public news that came out afterwards. Yeah, so I think this one is one where the data breach itself is usually a result of one of the types of attacks that we mentioned earlier, but there's a lot of things you can do to make your data a bit more secure and provide some protection against, even if an attack is carried out in your organization and an attacker gets access, limiting the scope of what they can actually get their hands on in terms of data and then remove or exfiltrate from your organization. So Ambika, I'll move on to the key learnings page.
Yeah, and this one is reiterating some of the things that we heard in that word cloud. So strong password protection is quite important. I know there is a question around password protection, which we'll answer towards the end. Conducting risk assessments of your suppliers and understanding where your valuable data is sitting. Quite important because a lot of the times not-for-profits have a lot of data libraries that may be 20 years old, 10 years old, but archiving policies may not be perfect. So something to consider is the data required anymore? Is this compliant with regulatory requirements of data storage, etc.? Is quite important. And one of the lessons that we learn through this is providing clear and accurate details of the breach as soon as the business gets affected. There have been examples, for Target is a good example where they were not able to provide accurate details. They went to the customers with some details around card data loss and then went with other information after a week. Yeah, their CEO had to step down because of the media coverage and the inaccuracy of the information. So it's really important to engage with your donors and customers and stakeholders in that moment. I think one of the good things that this organization did was creating a hotline, and Australian Red Cross Blood Service also suffered a breach, and they also had a hotline up and running. So that actually didn't reduce the number of blood donors at the end. So sometimes cyber breaches can be used as an advantage to build trust in throughout your customers. So I mean, enabling multi-factor authentication is another key one, where this is not a control that's only required for your professional life, but also personal life. So for your Facebook, for your Gmail, for your kids' accounts, make sure that we are using two-step verification process and it's not just a password. So we'll go through the next one and there will be more learnings from that scenario.
The next one is ransomware resulting in data loss. So as I'm sure you've all heard of a ransomware attack, basically a type of malware that once it's executed in an organization's network, it will prevent or restrict users from accessing their systems and their data by locking up files until a ransom is paid. It often you'll know when you've experienced a ransomware incident because of that lack of access, but they also usually leave a ransomware note, a file that's sitting somewhere on your computer that when you open might even have a countdown timer to put added pressure on requests for payment until data is actually leaked to the dark web. So we see a lot about ransomware attacks in the headlines and on the news, but actually the reality is that most victims never appear publicly because they quietly pay and try to make the problem go away. So the news that we're seeing is only a small percentage of the attacks that are actually happening, and along with that, many companies that do pay don't actually choose to report that they have paid or the amount that they've paid. So there's quite a lot that's not known about the impact of ransomware attacks across Australia and in the sector. But as kind of sophistication rises, the demands become higher. There's new kind of ways that ransomware is being carried out, where malware is being developed and ransomware kits are being developed for other people in the dark web to actually buy into and carry out, and it leads to much less sophisticated attackers being able to have really, really big impacts on their victims. There's also a change in the types of demands we're seeing. So it's not only pay the ransom to get your data and systems unlocked, but also pay up a second time or we'll release all your data on the dark web. So it's kind of that two-pronged approach that's being favoured now. And also they can hold hostage assets like any financial information from employees or customers, critical business processes. If they know what your operations depend on, they can kind of prevent you from accessing those key applications and data. And also like the personal information that organisations are bound by law to protect and have specific responsibilities over is often targeted as well. So in this scenario, in 2020, an aged care provider in Australia was targeted with a ransomware attack by an overseas third party. It was part of a much broader campaign of a ransomware type that was called Smes, which was run by a financially motivated cyber criminal group looking to exploit the sensitive and medical information that was held by organisations in the healthcare sector. And as Mbika mentioned, the healthcare sector is particularly targeted, and this attack prompted the ACSC to provide a warning specifically to aged care and health organisations because of the criticality of the services that they were offering. And specifically, this attack happened during COVID, where there was added criticality on health and aged care providers. Another thing to note is that healthcare sector is also known by cyber criminals to carry a lot of legacy technology. So I think there was over 22% of healthcare organizations use legacy or kind of out-of-date systems that don't have software updates or vendor support provided anymore. And a lot of them aren't aware of the support that is available. So that makes them a really easy target for these kind of ransomware attacks. The impact of this scenario was that there was data stolen, which included personal information of customers and employees, and operational documents as well from some of their different locations. So that was care and accommodation agreements that were then released and sold on the dark web. So this organisation had to launch an IT investigation. They were able to maintain their critical operations, and they put that down to having very useful business continuity plans that were really effective in the aftermath of the incident. So we'll touch on those as part of the lessons learned, but that was something that they wouldn't have been able to do had they not been so well prepared for an incident like this happening. I just wanted to note as well, the average cost of rectifying the results or impact of a ransomware attack is huge because of all the factors like downtime, the time it takes to restore, because when people do carry out ransomware attacks, they don't only lock things up, but they can destroy data, they can remove systems, they can infect devices. So it's cost of replacing devices, cost of rebuild, cost of the ransom that it may potentially be paid as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think ransomware affects availability. That's the key aim, and the more evolved version of ransomware also affects confidentiality of data. So the data breach along with availability of systems is a key source of pain for organizations. In order to do some things about it, I think the key ones we've mentioned here, and there are more, but key is to back up your data. Back up your data, have a strategy for responding to ransomware events. That's one thing that we can learn from all these events, all these incidents that are happening at the moment. And not just backing up your data onshore, but backing up your data in a separate server so that if your primary server is impacted, then you have a backup. And that backup needs to be regularly tested as well. Not just making sure, like not just having backup is enough. Testing that backup and testing the whole response plan is quite important in this scenario. Ensuring that you've got contact information and a cross-functional team to respond to ransomware incidents is quite important, because in such scenarios, you often need legal expertise. You often need to engage the regulator. You often need to engage with the media, go out to your sponsors and donors and subscribers. So having a cross-functional ransomware incident response plan is important. Without going into too much detail, making your employees aware of how to identify things, which is common across all scenarios. I think that's one thing that is common across every cyber incident. Employees can act as your first line of defense. And you can also use application whitelisting, or to start with blacklisting, and block harmful sites and applications to reduce the likelihood of employees clicking on those certain links. But if you go more mature capabilities, you can have detection capabilities and response capabilities as well. But given the funding structure and the pressures on not-for-profit sector, these are very simple tips that we can do with minimum investments.
And I'll just move on. We had an overarching 5 simple steps to improve security. We have talked through these, you have talked through these after each of the case studies, but just to touch on the steps that we identify as being the critical ones for our not-for-profit organisations. Uplifting cyber awareness and education across all levels of staff and employees, regularly updating software and operating systems, ensuring that multi-factor authentication is enabled, understanding your organization's cyber risks, so conducting assessments to understand where you need to focus efforts and funding that you do have to put towards cybersecurity, and also that incident response planning, which is really critical. There are lots of free resources that can assist with implementing these 5 steps, so I'll just quickly run through these. The slides that we send out will include hyperlinks to all of these, so we'll make sure that you can look at them in your own time, and we're really keen to get onto the questions that we've seen coming through. So I'll just walk through these quickly. Some of the really valuable general cybersecurity resources that we're aware of. Obviously, the Digital Transformation Hub, which is run by InfoExchange, is fantastic. Lots of helpful guides and advice across cybersecurity and other domains as well. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre has plenty of really helpful guides for small business and step-by-step guides that you can take away and tailor for your organisation, or just use as is off the shelf. So we'll make sure that a few of those are linked for everyone. We've also got the Acmc Governance Toolkit for Cybersecurity. So that's really focused on charity and not-for-profit cybersecurity, and that's a really good place to start. There's also more specific resources around understanding privacy obligations, so understanding the notifiable breaches scheme, data breaches scheme. These are kind of things that you don't want to be doing in the aftermath of an incident itself. You want to be doing beforehand, so you understand what you need to do and when. There's obviously a lot of stress in the aftermath of a cyber incident, so having as much of an understanding as possible before the fact is really useful. Privacy compliance manuals, privacy impact assessments. There's lots of ready-to-go templates that don't require a lot of work to be applicable to your organisation, and privacy guides about complying with the laws in Australia. We've also got incident response tools here and resources, so social media vandalism, reporting cyber incidents, a sample incident response template, which is really crucial and includes like considerations that organisations should make in the aftermath of an incident, who needs to be involved in decision making, what kind of steps need to be taken, what are the key priorities, what are the kind of support available, whether it's from insurers or from other third parties. And then the Office of Australian Information Commissioner also has notifiable data breach reporting portals. So we'll make sure those are hyperlinked and included in the pack after we send that out. We might move on to questions now. I know we've got a couple come through. Ambika?
Yes, thank you so much, Julia and Abhika. So, yep, there's a couple of questions coming, so I'll just let you ladies to ask and answer the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a question. With multiple cloud applications, each with their own login requirements, users have a habit of using the same password for all applications and record it somewhere on a physical notebook. What solutions are available for a non-digital native workforce to help them manage their login credentials? I'll start, and Julia, I'll throw to you for any additional information, but there are password managers that can be used and are quite easy to download on your phones and use that as a means to save your password information and not have to write them on post-it notes, etc. So that's one way to do it. But make sure that password manager is approved by the security team and IT team for use across the organization.
Yeah, that's right. And Ambika, I think we see this a lot. Sometimes you'll go into a workplace and see post-it notes and sticky notes with people's usernames and passwords, and there are so many things to keep track of these days. But I think, like you said, that password manager application, a lot of them are really easy to use, either included with some of the software that you might already have, or not hugely costly to implement, and making sure that everyone in the organisation is using a secure and approved application is really critical. So that would be my advice as well.
And I think I just got additional information is Connecting Up has discount password management software for not-for-profits. So we can send you a link of Connecting Up later on, which you can access and see how that can be used. The next question was with shifts in organizational working practice, working from home versus working in office, what should organizations be focusing on to ensure they maintain security? Julia, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, probably front of mind for me is all the things that are ingrained in us and the behaviours that we do as a matter of course in the office setting. Sometimes are lost when we go home because we kind of relax and don't take such a disciplined approach to the security behaviours that we might have heard are really important at work. So things like locking your laptop when you leave. If you're living alone, obviously not so much of an issue unless you've got particularly nosy pets or family members. But other than that, I think just making sure that you're following the same steps that you're taking at work. If you're using personal devices, making sure that your organisation is considering what additional security measures and controls need to be established around the use of personal devices, and just really making sure that you're keeping up with the usual security kind of behaviours that you would at work.
Yeah, and I think some organizations are also looking at creating a work from home guide, which is very specific, very simple for your users who are working from home. So they might be printing documents at home, they might be, taking sensitive calls at home. So it's important to give them some instructions in a very simple way where they can see, okay, these are the simple things we need to do when we're working from home and we are using our own devices, and making sure that they are accessed through VPN, which is a virtual private network, and they're not being accessed to just normal internet. So those type of tips can be given on a one-pager for people. Jean, I can only see two. If you want to throw other questions in the chat that might have come up.
No worries. I'll just put it in the chat instead of the questions box. So can you see that now? So this one is from Jeffrey with multiple cloud applications. So it's on the chat.
Yeah, I think we've taken that one for password managers. I can see them now. So there's another one from Partha. Is there
Yes.
data on how much SMEs survive a cyber attack and come out at the end still trading? That's a really good question. I don't think we have data right now, but we will look into it. And if we find information, we will send it to you. But a lot of the, the examples we have seen, none of the NFPs have been consumed by the cyber attack or have gone out of their trust and business. It's almost like if it's the disruption that is caused to employees, to donors, to subscribers, that has been a huge cost to NFPs and takes time to recover.
And I think as well, the limited kind of financial resources to respond and recover from an attack. So launching investigations into how an attack happened, what kind of data was lost. If those things aren't easily accessible, those investigations can be hugely expensive. And then all the requirements around notifying donors and things, those coordinated communication campaigns, legal advice around what kind of notifications need to happen, what kind of warnings and advice need to go out to victims. Or impacted donors or customers, that all costs a lot of money. So I think the key risks there would be, like Amika said, disruption and also that financial impact.
Yeah. There's another interesting one. What advice do you have for users who receive Vanguary scam calls? And these can be disruptive to workday, and if the call is responded to, can lead to premium call costs. I think that's something that we all face, and even I'm receiving a lot of calls. What I personally do is not pick up the phone if I'm getting a call from an unknown number. If there is a person who needs to reach me, they will either text me or call me again. But if it's an unknown number coming from international locations or caller IDs, like secret caller IDs, then I generally don't pick up. I think we need, as an industry, we need to do something about those type of calls. As a person individually, try not to pick them up.
I would say the same. I think there's very few people who need to reach you that don't have a second, legitimate people who are trying to contact you that wouldn't have a second method of communication. calls from the ATO and those kind of things that we've all probably received, they would always have more than one method of contacting you about something that was really important that you needed to get back to them about, whether it's post or email or something else. So yeah, I'm the same, Mbika. I don't answer unknown numbers or blocked numbers. I'll usually, if I have a hunch who it's from, I'll usually reach out directly using a contact number that I've used before or something I've found from the protected website or correspondence I've had with the organisation previously, and just ask whether it was them reaching out.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in interest of time, I'll take another one. How do you think the escalating situation in Ukraine may play out in cyberspace? That's a very interesting question. I mean, I don't want to express my personal opinions, but it is an indicator of evolving cyber warfare, in my opinion, and a lot of what we will see in the future. And I think a lot of our government organizations and private organizations are focused on that. The future will be about cyber warfare and countries going after each other using cyber as a means of creating an impact. So it's a topic that can go on and on. So in the interest of time, I'll just say that for now.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that we talked earlier about the kind of smash and grab cyber attacks that we see a lot of, where there's financial motivations and cyber criminals are just looking to get as much as they can as quickly as they can. I think the rise in kind of that nation-based, state-based espionage will probably be something that is more prevalent going forward as well.
Okay. We might just take another 5 minutes to answer some more. Do you know cybots? There's a cybotsci.com. Contact us. I haven't heard of them, but it's a question from Paula. Paula, do you want to expand on your question quickly?
Yeah, let's see if she can expand that. While we are waiting for her, maybe we answer the last question from Vipatha.
Sure.
Is there data, that one?
Yeah,
About
we've
the
taken that one. Yeah. Jane, we've taken that one. Is there data? So we don't have the data on the top of our heads, but if we find that data, we will definitely go back to Partha with it. Most of the organizations are still in business. They're still getting donors, and there are a few examples of extreme operational impacts, but I don't have a percentage at hand. I think we've covered all of them.
Yes, and now Paula is now clarifying the questions, and now I'm assigning to you.
How much cyber insurance would you recommend as a minimum? That's a very, very good question. Look, cyber insurance is a debatable topic. Cyber insurance depends on the level of maturity of your organization and how you're protecting your information. So the premium depends on like your cyber posture itself. I think it's good to explore that option to get incident response support, because a lot of cyber insurance organizations provide incident response support and specialist support. So there's no right or wrong number in terms of how much, but explore that option to understand how the insurance mechanism can support you to get incident response capabilities or specialist access at the time of an incident. Next one, we've got installing a client on endpoints, scan existing breach or compromises and ongoing threats and issues. Yeah, Paula, if I understand correctly, I think we haven't heard of that specific tool, but there are a lot of tools available to scan the endpoints and identify issues. So they are like your endpoint protection devices, and they can be installed on your machines and servers to protect them. So we can probably have a chat afterwards and probably explore a little bit more if we can help in that space.
I don't know if there's specific product recommendations, but a lot of the resources that we shared, particularly around the ACSC guides and guidance, will have that information around endpoint scanning and protection as well.
Yeah. Awesome.
Lovely, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
So let's get all the questions answered. So before we finish, do you have any things to add?
No, I think this was great. Seeing so many questions come up shows that people are interested and taking time to actually prioritize this. So that's really good to see. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Lovely. So I'll thank you again, Ambika and Julia from PwC, to give us such a very interactive webinars. So I'm sure there's lots of takeaway. And again, we'll be sending you the presentation deck and the recording in 1 to 2 business days, including the password management with a discounted fee from Connecting Up. So you'll get the link. If you find this useful for you, please feel free to purchase it online with the link. Thank you so much. So I guess most of you are seeing my screen now. So we just want to share with you just about our upcoming webinar. So apart from cybersecurity topic, we are offering like marketing topic as well. So on the 8th of March, we are having a really, really interesting bootcamp. It's the 2022 Content Creators by Kate. So Kate Vandiver is a very experienced social media strategist. So she is offering us a 4 sections bootcamps starting from 8th of March. So if you're interested, please feel free to register by the QR code, or you can get them registered in the follow-up email as well. So just briefly, the bootcamp is really about how to plan, create, and amplify the hyper-personal content in a social media so that you can really engage with your audience and get the best results. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, again. And thank you for listening to us. We'll see you very soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.